A hot, sultry evening in Charleston enveloped the city in a sticky blanket of humidity. The air stood still, as if time had frozen in anticipation of something inevitable. In the depths of a quiet suburb, in a cozy two-story house with neatly trimmed hydrangea bushes, Sarah Lawrence stood in the kitchen, clutching a thin piece of paper that burned in her hands heavier than lead. Her breathing faltered, and her heart seemed to pound against her ribs with such force that it echoed loudly in the empty kitchen. In the bright light of the lamps above the marble countertop, the white hotel receipt looked innocuous, an unremarkable piece of paper that could have been lost among supermarket receipts or water bills. But for Sarah, these few lines on the crumpled sheet were a death sentence to everything she believed in. She reread them again and again, hoping that a mistake would soon reveal itself, that the letters would blur and disappear, turning this hell into a figment of her imagination. Magnolia Inn Hotel, July 14th, room 205. Two guests, Marcus Lawrence, Savannah Rogers. Her husband's name stood next to another woman's name so mundanely, so ordinarily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sarah ran her finger over the paper, as if she could erase this text, as if she could erase reality with one motion. But reality did not yield. Sarah sank onto a high stool at the bar counter, not letting go of the paper from her fingers. Her entire life over the past few minutes had crumbled to dust. 15 years of marriage, 2 daughters, dozens of shared holidays, thousands of nights spent together. She remembered how Marcus once, smiling, tossed the girls in the air, how they all went to the ocean as a family, how he massaged her shoulders in the evenings after long shifts at the hospital. "No, it's impossible," she muttered, but her voice betrayed her trembling. Her mind tried to find a loophole, an excuse. It could be a mistake. Maybe it was another Marcus Lawrence, someone with the same name. But deep down she already knew the truth. This receipt did not come to her by chance. She had searched for it. Sarah found the check in Marcus's jeans pocket when she decided to throw some clothes in the wash. It was folded and hidden deeper than usual. That was enough to make something sting inside her. Her subconscious instantly scanned the last few months of their lives, piecing together all the troubling signs into one pattern. Marcus had started spending more time at work. All those late meetings, all those unexpected business trips. He started checking his phone more often, keeping it face down. His touches became cold, his kisses mechanical, and the nights empty and drawn out. And yet she did not want to believe. She did not want to believe, even when his shirt started smelling of someone else's perfume. She did not want to believe, even when he came home with a distant look on his face, forgetting that he had promised to have dinner with the family. She did not want to believe, even when his friends never called to confirm his guys' weekends. And now before her lay evidence that left no room for doubt. Her husband was sleeping with another woman, her heart constricted with pain. A rage rose in her chest, so intense that for a moment it seemed as if the kitchen had shrunk, the walls closing in around her. Her hands trembled, her breathing quickened. She pressed her cold fingers to her lips to keep from screaming. "Calm down, Sarah. Calm down." She stood up and paced around the kitchen, trying to calm herself. The wooden floor pleasantly cooled her bare feet, but even that could not slow the feverish stream of thoughts. Who is she? How long has this been going on? Where do they meet? Does he love her? Or maybe he never loved me. Sarah grabbed her phone. Her heart pounded in anticipation. Marcus's number lit up on the screen. He had promised he would be home by 8. It was 10:02. She hit dial. "Hey, honey," he answered cheerfully as if nothing had happened. "I'm on my way home. I got held up at work. How was your day?" His voice was light, weightless, too ordinary. Sarah gripped her fingers on the edge of the marble countertop. "Are you sure you were at work, Marcus?" she asked, and her voice sounded colder than she expected. A brief pause. "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" Sarah ran her tongue over her dry lips, feeling the cold rage rising inside her. "I found a receipt from the Magnolia Inn, room 205. There was a dead silence on the line. The pause was too long. That was enough to confirm everything she feared. "Sarah," he began, but she did not let him finish. "Don't you dare lie to me." Silence. She heard his breathing, tense, broken. Then he exhaled, and something in that exhale told her everything she needed to know. He did not deny it. He did not start making excuses. He knew he had been caught. Sarah felt something inside her crumble completely, as if the last threads of their past were breaking under the weight of betrayal. She slowly sank onto the stool, clutching the receipt in her fingers. The world around her became too bright, too sharp. At that moment she realized she was no longer a wife. She was no longer the Sarah who loved, believed, and forgave. That Sarah was dead. In her place was another woman, strong, cold, thirsting for revenge. And the revenge would be sweet. Sarah sat in the dark living room, holding a glass of wine in her hand. The house was silent, broken only by the muffled ticking of the clock on the wall. In another room upstairs, her children slept peacefully, unaware that their family had just turned into ruins. Marcus had not returned yet. She did not know where he was now. After that phone call, he had not called, not texted, not tried to explain himself. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he was already composing lies in his head, trying to figure out how to turn the situation in his favor. Sarah was not waiting for explanations. She knew how such men worked. They do not admit guilt. They twist, justify, play on emotions, making you think it's all your fault. They say it was just a moment of weakness, that they felt nothing for the other woman. They beg, swear that it was a mistake, that it won't happen again. But it does, it always does. Sarah replayed that conversation in her head over and over, scrutinizing every pause, every movement of his breath. She had always thought she knew her husband. She believed she could guess his thoughts from his gaze, from the way he tilted his head, from the way his voice changed when he was tired. But now she realized she had never truly known him. For 15 years, she had lived with a stranger. When the door slammed, Sarah did not even look up. She had already heard his car pull up, heard his heavy footsteps on the driveway, how he hesitated for a second at the door, as if gathering his courage before entering. "Sarah!" He stood in the doorway of the living room. The light from the street softly outlined his silhouette. She was in no hurry to answer. She took a sip of wine and only then looked up at him. Marcus looked tired but not broken. He did not look like a man who had just destroyed a family. Rather, he was tense, like a man waiting for a verdict. "Are you going to say something, or are you just going to stare?" Her voice was quiet, almost lazy, but the coldness in it was sharper than a knife. He ran his hand over the back of his neck, as if he didn't know where to start. "Sarah, I didn't want you to find out like this." She smirked. "You didn't want me to find out at all, right? If I hadn't found the receipt, you would have kept living a double life? Come home, smile at the kids, kiss me goodbye, and then go to her." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. "It's not like that. It's—" "What, Marcus?" Her voice became sharper. "Tell me how it is. Is it an accident? A mistake? Just once? It's not just sex." Those words hit her harder than if he had lied. Sarah gripped the glass in her hand so tightly that it almost shattered. "Do you love her?" Silence. She watched him, every expression on his face. She had always been taught, when a person lies, they avoid eye contact. But if a person does not answer right away, it means they are looking for an answer that will sound less painful. Marcus hesitated. I don't know." Sarah abruptly stood up. "What the hell does 'I don't know' mean?" Her voice broke, but she could not stop. "You know, Marcus, if you didn't love her, you wouldn't even be thinking about it." Marcus slowly ran his hand over his face. He looked lost, cornered, and that angered her even more. "I didn't plan it, Sarah. I swear. It all started by accident." "Are you saying you accidentally ended up in her bed?" "No, I mean, I didn't think it would go this far. We were just talking. At first, it was innocent, but then you started lying to me. You started hiding her. You started sneaking out of the house to be with her. This is not an accident, Marcus. This is a choice." He sighed heavily and sat in the chair across from her. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Sarah." She laughed bitterly. "But you did. You destroyed me." Tears burned her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She did not want him to see her weakness. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, she saw fear in his eyes. But he was not afraid of losing her. He was afraid of the consequences. "What now?" he asked quietly. Sarah stared at him. Before, she thought that if she ever found out about the betrayal, she would just leave. But now that it had happened, everything was not so simple. She had a plan, but it did not include running away. Sarah smiled for the first time that evening, and that smile scared Marcus more than all her screams. "Now, Marcus, now we're going to play by my rules." She raised her glass, taking the last sip, and set it on the table. "Welcome to the new stage of our marriage. I hope you enjoy it." She turned and left the room, leaving him stunned. Marcus still did not understand what had just happened. But Sarah knew. This was the first step toward her revenge. The night in Charleston breathed with sultry silence. There was no wind, and even the cicadas seemed to have fallen silent, as if the city was holding its breath, sensing the coming storm. Sarah lay in bed, her eyes wide open. On the nightstand, the phone screen glowed dimly. 1:47. Next to her, on the other side of the bed, Marcus breathed evenly, but not as deeply as when he slept peacefully. He was pretending. She did not need to see his face to know that. His body was tense. She heard him swallow a couple of times, as if suppressing emotions. He was waiting for her to say something, waiting for her decision. But Sarah did not give him that satisfaction. She was biding her time. This was the first step in her game. When they finished that tense conversation in the living room, Marcus looked lost. There was panic in his eyes, not from guilt, not from regret, but from fear of the consequences. He expected hysteria. He expected her to scream, break dishes, throw things at him. But Sarah did none of that. She just smiled. And that broke him more than any outburst of anger. Now, staring into the darkness, she remembered every gesture, every small reaction of his that evening. She felt an unexpected calm. Before, she had always thought that if her husband betrayed her, she would leave, take the children, pack her things, and disappear. But now that it had happened, her heart did not want to run. It wanted to destroy. Morning. When Sarah came downstairs, the kitchen already smelled of coffee. Marcus was sitting at the table looking at his phone. But as soon as he heard her footsteps, he quickly put it aside. "Good morning." His voice was tense, like a string. She slowly walked to the coffee maker, poured herself a cup, and took a sip. "Morning," she replied evenly. Marcus watched her, studying her reaction. He was on edge. It seemed to him that this was the calm before the storm. "Did you sleep well?" he asked uncertainly. Sarah set the cup on the table and tilted her head, as if pondering. "Pretty much. It's just that you were tossing and turning all night. Is something bothering you?" She saw his throat twitch as he swallowed. "Sarah." "Don't, Marcus." He fell silent. She sat down across from him and, for the first time in the last 24 hours, looked directly into his eyes. "Are you afraid I'll leave you?" Marcus froze. Are you afraid I'll file for divorce, take the kids, and turn your life into hell?" He exhaled deeply. "I don't want that." Sarah smiled. "Don't worry, I don't want that either." He blinked, clearly not expecting such an answer. "You, seriously?" "Absolutely. Divorce is too easy a way out, don't you think?" Marcus was silent. He did not understand where she was going with this. Sarah reached for her cup and took another sip of coffee, enjoying his desperate, tense gaze. "We're going to have a new stage, Marcus. A new format of relationship. And I think you should get used to it." Her voice was light, almost playful, but her eyes burned with cold fire. And Marcus understood. This was just the beginning. Savannah Rogers felt anxious. She sat on the back porch of her house, holding a glass of orange juice. The hot sun burned her skin, but inside she was freezing. Ever since Marcus had left for his wife the night before, he hadn't texted, hadn't called, hadn't said how it all ended, and it was killing her. Savannah had never thought she would find herself in such a situation. She was not a homewrecker, not someone who sought out men who had families. But with Marcus, it was different. When they met, she saw in him a loneliness that was familiar to her, his desperate attempt to escape from something. At first, they just talked. Then came the short meetings, light touches, fleeting glances, and here she was, waiting for a man who was now perhaps trying to save his marriage. You knew this would happen, Savannah. She closed her eyes and squeezed the glass in her hands. Guilt gnawed at her. She had not wanted to destroy someone else's life, but she had fallen in love. She had fallen in love with a married man, fallen in love with a lie. The phone rang, startling her. She grabbed it, her heart jumping. Marcus. Hi, her voice trembled. He was silent for a few seconds. I can't talk long. She felt her chest tighten. What happened? Sarah. She knows. Savannah's chest constricted, as if someone had squeezed all the air out of her. And now what? Marcus hesitated. I don't know, but she hasn't filed for divorce. She's acting strangely. Savannah frowned. What do you mean? She's calm, too calm. Silence. Somewhere deep in her soul, in the farthest corner of her mind, Savannah felt fear. Do you think she's planning something? Her voice was barely audible. Marcus nervously chuckled. I don't know, but this isn't like her. Savannah bit her lip. Be careful. When Marcus returned home, Sarah was already waiting for him in the living room. A soft smile played on her face. How was your day? She asked, getting up from the couch. He looked at her warily. Fine. She came closer. Her hand slid over the button of his shirt, slowly unbuttoning it. Good. He shuddered at her touch. This was not tenderness. This was a reminder of who now controlled this game. Sarah smiled. Welcome to the new reality, Marcus. I hope you enjoy it. She leaned in and kissed him on the cheek before turning and walking upstairs, leaving him stunned. He understood. He had lost. And this was only the beginning of her game. Marcus felt like he was suffocating. He sat in his car, parked in an empty parking lot near the office, staring blankly at the steering wheel. His temples throbbed, his throat was dry. His entire life had been turned upside down in the last 24 hours. He had always thought that if Sarah found out, it would end in a loud scandal. He expected anger, broken dishes, tears. But he had not expected this. Sarah had not thrown a tantrum, had not kicked him out. She just smiled, and that smile terrified him. When he came home the night before, her gaze was soft, almost warm. You're late, she said calmly, placing a plate of dinner in front of him. Marcus looked at the plate, not understanding what was happening. Were you at work all day? She asked this question too simply, but Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Yes, of course. She slowly raised her eyes to him, and in her gaze flashed disappointment. You're lying to me again. He swallowed. Sarah took a fork, cut a piece of chicken, and leisurely put it in her mouth. You understand that I know everything, right? I know where you were. I know who you were with. And I know that you just lied to me again. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He did not know what was worse, if she had thrown a tantrum, or this strange, icy silence. Sarah. You, just be quiet and eat. We both know everything has changed. He could not say anything, and Sarah just smiled and continued her dinner. Now sitting in the car, Marcus tried to understand. What was she planning? He had known his wife for 15 years, and she had never behaved like this. Savannah Rogers nervously bit her nail, scrolling through her phone. She was waiting for a message from Marcus, but instead she received a message from an unknown number. Do you know that Marcus is sleeping not only with you? Her breath caught. What? Her hands trembled. She looked at the screen, counting the words. Who is this? Savannah tried to call the number, but the phone hung up. She reread the message. Her first impulse was not to believe it, but something inside made her think. Why hadn't he texted for so long? Why did he say Sarah was acting strangely? Why didn't he tell her what was happening between them? And another question she was afraid to ask. What if he really is sleeping not only with me? Sarah looked at the screen of her laptop, hiding a smile. She saw how Savannah read her message. She imagined how she began to doubt, how her hands trembled, how the first sparks of suspicion flared in her mind. The first trap had worked. Now Savannah would dig. She would start checking Marcus, looking for evidence, thinking that he was lying to her just as he had lied to his wife. Sarah would make sure that even if Savannah did not believe her now, in a couple of days she would start seeing signs everywhere. This was the beginning of the destruction of their trust. Marcus returned home late. Sarah was waiting for him in the office. When he entered, she did not look up from the laptop screen. "How was your day?" "Fine," he answered cautiously. She slowly raised her eyes to him. "Were you with her?" He tensed. "What are you talking about?" Sarah leaned back in her chair. "You should answer honestly, Marcus, because I already know the answer." He felt that fear again. Sarah knew everything. She was one step ahead. But what was she aiming for? He could not understand her plan. She was not yelling, not demanding a divorce, not kicking him out. She just controlled. And he began to realize he was no longer in control of this game. Meanwhile, Savannah sat on the couch, staring at her phone screen. She had already started looking for evidence. She checked old messages, remembered dates, remembered when Marcus said he was busy. Now everything looked different. Now everything looked suspicious. She began to believe the words of the unknown sender. And Sarah, sitting in her bedroom, picked up her phone and typed a new message. "Do you know where he is now?" Savannah stared at the screen. She did not know, and that intensified her fear. Sarah smiled. Now everything was going according to her plan. Charleston lived its usual life. The hot, lazy air filled the streets. People hurried about their business, gossiped in cafes, walked their dogs in the park. But for three people in this city, nothing was usual. Marcus Lawrence, Sarah Lawrence, Savannah Rogers. Three lives that had recently existed separately were now entwined in a dangerous, tense web of lies and manipulation. And Sarah held the strings in her hands. Marcus felt the noose tightening around him. Every time he entered the house, it seemed to him that Sarah knew something new. She did not tell him what exactly. She just watched. She smiled, but in her eyes was a cold certainty. This was driving him crazy. She was not yelling, not trying to sort things out, not crying. She was dangerously calm. And that meant only one thing. She was preparing something he could not predict. Savannah tried to make sense of the chaos that her life had become. She was not a stupid woman. She knew that dating a married man was not the best idea, but she really believed that Marcus was honest with her. Now her mind was a whirlwind of paranoia. The words from the anonymous messages would not leave her mind. "Do you know where he is? Are you sure you're the only one?" She no longer knew. She tried to convince herself that it was a lie, but everything she saw in Marcus's behavior only intensified her fear. He became even more secretive, called less often, responded with short messages. She tried to ask him directly. "Someone told me you're sleeping not only with me. Is it true?" Marcus was good at lying. He did not freeze, did not look away. "Who said that?" "You answer." He slowly exhaled. "No, Savannah, I'm with you. Only you. Whoever is trying to break us up is lying." But now his words did not sound as convincing as before. Now she doubted. Sarah saw how the pieces moved on her chessboard. She created chaos, but she herself remained absolutely calm. The plan was working. Savannah was doubting. Marcus was panicking. Now she just needed to push the situation in the right direction. She slowly flipped through old photos on her phone. Family snapshots, birthdays, vacation by the ocean. She stopped at one of her favorite photos. Marcus holding their daughters on his shoulders, both laughing, Sarah standing next to him, leaning against him. That Marcus was dead. That man was a loving husband, a faithful partner, a caring father. And this Marcus, this man had destroyed their lives, and Sarah would destroy his in return. She picked up her phone and began typing a new message for Savannah. "Are you sure he's not sleeping with his wife?" Marcus entered the bedroom, wiping his face with a towel after a shower. Sarah was already lying in bed reading a book. He felt uneasy. She was too relaxed. Why wasn't she saying anything? He realized he was afraid to know the answer. Savannah lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone vibrated. New message. She slowly reached for it. "Are you sure he's not sleeping with his wife?" Something in that message pierced her like a needle. She was not sure. She was no longer sure of anything. Sarah closed her eyes, satisfied with how everything was unfolding. Now she had all the time in the world. Time to watch, time to destroy, time to take revenge. Marcus himself had destroyed their marriage. Sarah would just destroy his life. The southern sun of Charleston softly reflected in the windows of cafes. The wind lazily rustled the tall palms along the coastal line, and the streets of the city continued to live their usual lives. It seemed that nothing had changed, but for three people, this city was now a graveyard of their past. Marcus Lawrence, Sarah Lawrence, Savannah Rogers. The game was over. Each got their outcome. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed in a rented apartment, staring into the darkness. The silence was deafening. Before, when he lived in the family home, the silence was never so oppressive. It was diluted with the laughter of children, the sounds of dinner being prepared, the soft footsteps of Sarah on the floor. Now there was only empty echo around him. 2 weeks ago, he had signed the divorce papers. Sarah had given him no choice. When they met in the lawyer's office, he expected to see anger, resentment, hatred in her eyes. But she was completely calm. She carried herself like a winner, but without triumph. "I don't hold a grudge against you, Marcus," she said when he signed the papers, "but you are no longer a part of my life." Her words cut deeper than a knife. Now he had nothing. No home. Sarah kept the house, and he did not fight it. He knew he had no moral right to it. No children. The girls did not want to see him. Sarah never forbade them, but they distanced themselves on their own. When he tried to call, they answered in monosyllables and then stopped picking up the phone altogether. Work was no longer the same. The scandal had damaged his reputation, clients started leaving, colleagues looked at him differently. But the worst was not that. The worst was the realization that he himself was to blame for everything. He thought he could control his life, be a clever player, keep everything under control. But he had lost. And now he sat alone, staring at his phone. A new message appeared on the screen. From Sarah. "Now you know what it's like to lose everything." He closed his eyes, feeling the words cut even deeper. Sarah sat on the veranda of her new home, watching the setting sun. In her hands, she held a glass of wine, and in it reflected the last rays of the setting sun. She had achieved what she wanted. She had seen Marcus's life in ruins. She had seen him lose his family, status, respect. She had seen fear and confusion in his eyes when she realized that he no longer controlled the situation, but she did. He is destroyed. Savannah is broken. She is free. Then why was there such emptiness in her chest? When it all began, she thought that revenge would bring relief. She thought that enjoying his downfall would fill the void left by his betrayal. But no. The fire that burned inside had consumed not only him, but her as well. She was no longer the woman who once loved Marcus. She was no longer that loving, trusting wife she used to be. Now she was someone else, and this new person did not know what to do next. Her revenge had been fulfilled. But what now? Savannah Rogers looked in the mirror in a cheap motel room in Phoenix. She had chosen this city because it was far from Charleston, far from memories, far from the past, far from him. She thought she would find love. She thought Marcus was her chance at happiness. But now she hated him. After what Sarah had done, after all the messages, all the revelations, all the nightmares she had been through, she cursed the day she met him. The whole situation had used her, broken her, made her a victim in someone else's game. She swore she would never be the other woman again. Now she had only one path, to start over. She sighed, ran her hand over her face, and walked out of the motel into a completely new life. Sarah closed her laptop after sending the last message to Marcus. "Now you know what it's like to lose everything." She set the glass on the table and took a deep breath. This was the final act, the end of everything that connected her to the past. She looked at her phone. No new messages, only silence. It was over. She had won. But why didn't she feel lighter? Why was there no sense of triumph in her chest? She thought about her daughters, about the future that now belonged only to her. Revenge had not brought her happiness. But perhaps now, with everything behind her, she could find something more than just hatred. Sarah took the last sip of wine and looked out the window. The future awaited her, and she intended to write it on her own terms.